What is up, everybody? It is Scott the Dog Dad here from dogdadofficial.com and rawfeeding101.com. And today I am sitting down with the oh-so-smart William Hoekman. Hello, how are you, good sir?
I will take that as an introduction.
I will take that. You don't find offense to that one?
No.
I love it. I love it. So this is, dude, what do you want me to call you? I hear so many people calling you so many different things. There's William, there's Bill, there's Billy. Like, what do you like? How do you like being addressed? We probably should have done this before we hopped on.
That's a good question. It's funny because my Facebook says William, but Billy is what most people call me. So that's kind of the way to go.
All right, well, then let's go with it. We'll roll with that one then. And that's good because that's what I've been calling you.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, and I'm not like, 100% fan of any of them. I'm not in love with any of them. So, it's all good either way.
I love it. You'll just swing. I feel your pain. There's been Scoot, Scott, Scotty, Junior. I mean, there's so many names that people.
Well, it's now I'm going to call you Scoot. So it's settled at this point.
Do it, man. All right, so let's jump right in here. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that you're married. You got your beautiful little pug. You got a crazy schedule with answers, so I won't take up too much of your time. But I'm definitely going to take up some of your time because that's
I'm happy to be here. Absolutely.
So first question, super simple, basic stuff is, who is Billy? What's your background? What is your training? Who is Billy and what does he do? Yeah,
that's a good question. The first really interesting thing that I think so I'm the science coordinator for Answers Pet Food. So a little bit about my sort of day-to-day in terms of what I do. I do all the health and nutrition consultations for the company. So majority of my time is spent doing working with dogs with every variable of chronic disease condition. So be it, kidney disease, cancer, elevated liver enzymes, that kind of thing. So I'd say that's kind of like a majority of my time, but I'm also involved in R&D, which is probably my favorite part of the job in terms of, getting new products out that work for, healthy dogs and especially for dogs with these sort of chronic conditions. And then I also am the copywriter for a lot of things. So if you notice, and I always say this, there's a really corny joke on the back of our cheese treats, and I wrote that joke. So that sort of thing. So if you see like a blurb somewhere, company statement, usually I had something to do it. So we're a very small company, and so we kind of have our hand in a lot of things within the company. I would say, me and the, 8, 9, 10 other people who work for Answers Pet Food are very entrenched in the daily operation of running an actual pet food company, which is a lot, in terms of work and we all work a lot in terms of doing that. And so, but a lot of people don't know, kind of where I started and how I got hooked up with Answers. So the number one thing, and I think this actually bodes well for this sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, format that we're speaking right now, because who are you speaking to? Who's watching this? I mean, people who make their own diets at home. People who are interested in animal nutrition. People who are interested in giving their pets a better life. And that's where I started. So a lot of people don't know this, but I'm actually 100% self-taught. What I did was in 2006, I got my dog, Lua, and I asked a simple question. What do I feed a dog? I didn't grow up with dogs, didn't know anything about dogs. I was actually scared of dogs growing up. And so I said, what do I feed this dog? And, I remember the first lesson I got was I went into the pet store and they said, I was literally the person who said, oh, well, that one has science in the title, so I need to feed science diet. I was that person in 2006, right? And the late store said, no, there needs to be more meat in it. So then my brain works very singularly. My wife will tell you that, right? She's like, you talk about 4 things, all right? And pet food became one of those things. Nutrition never becomes uninteresting to me. So it's the same thing with Marvel superhero movies. It's the same thing with, the Green Bay Packers. There's a lot of things that I really love, right? And nutrition is one of those things. And so fast forward about 5 or so years later, I got to the point where I was making all my own food, much like a lot of people who are doing this. because I just flatly didn't trust any pet food companies.
Yeah.
And the deal is, boy, I tell you what, the more you get entrenched in the pet food industry and go to AFCO meetings like I do and that kind of thing, you're kind of like, oh, it's actually worse than I thought, right?
The more you learn, the more terrified you are.
Exactly. And so, but essentially, so making all my own food. And the really cool thing about Answers Pet Food is, so the science wing of the company, there's three elements to it. There's me, there's my boss, Jacqueline, who's the founder of the company, and her sister, Roxanne. Now, Jacqueline was a vet tech for 15 years, and she's also a microbiologist. Now, her sister has a master's degree in food science, specifically in culturing dairy, right? And so that's where that marriage comes together. But the really cool thing is we all came to all of these conclusions on our own, right? So Answers Pet Food didn't train me to know something because we just go by the science. We go by what is most likely to be true. So in 2008, around that time, no, actually I would say around 2010 when Answers started, I found Answers Pet Food. And I said, wow, here's a company that I can feed because they ethically match up to what I'm thinking. And here's a company that, you know, I follow what they're doing nutritionally and being based on the science. And then, you know, their transparency is completely transparent. So I can feed this. So I was doing both at the time. So at that point, I was doing a lot of things. I had my own business, pet sitting business, did a lot of things in the pet food industry. And you know, I mean, because I mean, you do this, you have a book and you field emails all the time. You become sort of that people that your friends might come to if they want to know something about animal nutrition, right? You become that sort of like regional expert with the internet now. It's like expert everywhere, right?
The guru. And,
yeah, exactly right. And although guru is kind of a funny word because it sounds too mystical for me. I'm like, no, it's like science-based though, but that's just kind of being picky. You know?
All I see is Mike Myers and the Love Guru.
Yeah, that is true. But by the way, this is bone broth, just for the record, just throwing that out there.
He actually drinks it, people. He doesn't just preach it.
Yeah, exactly right. It's not fish stock, but it's bone broth. So interesting thing happened in 2010. I didn't know Jacqueline had been using the food, didn't know they'd only been a company about 6 months, and took a chance. I wrote her a really long email about myself because her email was right there on the website, and said, I love science. This is who I am. You know, this is my absolute passion. And at the very end of the email, I said, and you have to hire me because it can't work for anyone else. And they did. And they took a chance on me.
I love it.
And yeah, and so I've been not the science coordinator forever, but the thing that brought us all together and the thing that brings everyone in Answers together is just the love of how do we make the best possible thing for an animal to eat. And so it's allowed me to be able to, you know, take my career in other avenues. I just had my 8th article published in Dogs Naturally. So, you know, it allows me to have some other avenues as well. And so for the people who are watching this and the people who are interested in it, it never becomes uninteresting because there's always new information, you know, and that's my favorite thing in life is learning. So that's the long version of where I come from.
Dude, I love that, especially just that. Oh, and you have to, by the way, you've got to hire me. I freaking love that.
She didn't have a choice. So,
oh man, I did not know so many of those things. Like I thought that you were there with Answers when they started. Yeah. I didn't know that you were doing a lot of that one-on-one disease stuff. Like I thought that you were purely R&D for the most part until we talked at Super Zoo. So hearing all of this is still just mind-opening. I love it. So you kind of went over, like you went into so many, you're like the perfect interviewee. You just went into so many things that I already had written down to ask.
Oh, well, there
like,
you go.
How did dogs come into your life? What is Answers? What do they do? But let's dive a little bit more into that one. So what types of products, you know, eagle eye view, what types of products does Answers provide the market?
We're the only producer of fermented raw pet food on the market. Which is incredibly important now because with everything that's going on with the FDA and, you know, should companies be HPPing? Should, you know, are they forced to HPP? Did they choose to HPP? With all these things happening right now, we have the best safety method, which, by the way, just like HPP is not a truly And sorry, I know you didn't ask me about HPP, but
no, go for it, man.
HPP is not actually recognized by the FDA as a kill step. In their literature, they say not only do you have to HPP, but they recommend heating it as well, which clearly that both of those things make zero sense. So
do you see the gears turning in my head right now? Like, huh?
Yeah. So we kind of, but we have the best food safety method because we don't do a kill step, we do an inhibition step. And what that is introducing a bunch of good bacteria to all of our products, allowing that bacteria to grow, and it inhibits the growth of said bad bacteria. And we've done competition studies, and we've actually seen salmonella be reduced in our food when you leave it out at room temperature for over 12 hours. So when you mishandle it, it's reduced because it's being out-competed. And this is really the only way to add a food safety step and to actually keep the food raw. Because as you may or may not know, when you, for instance, when you high pressure pasteurize food, you're changing the proteins, you're changing the fat structure, you're changing the enzyme activity. So
you're really denaturing it one way, right?
Yeah, it's cooking it with pressure is essentially what it is. And so that's why we will never do it. And just so you know, because there's a lot of misinformation out there right now, and everybody says, this company was forced to HPP. No one's ever been forced to HPP, and we will never HPP. So I thought I'd throw that out there. But in terms of what we do is we kind of take two elements. We do the fermented element, and then I think we really do a really great job in sourcing our products. And sourcing is everything in food. And so when it comes to where do you source your meat, where do you source your fish, where do you source every individual ingredient, we're always continually trying to make that better because that's what we would do for our own animals, right? And so we have to keep it within a certain range so people actually buy it. However, we find that instead of following a traditional pet food model, we can actually circumvent some of that and keep it in the same, up the quality while saving money. A good example of that would be, we used to have just organic vegetables in our food. Then instead of buying them from the farmer needs a piece of the cut, then the company, the broker we were buying from needs a piece of the cut, all that. Instead of that, we said, okay, we know this great Amish farmer named Samuel. Let's have him start growing and fermenting all our vegetables on his farm and just buy from him directly. So there, not only did you increase the quality because we're fermenting them on the farm with all that wild yeast and all of the actual fermenting that he's doing, but we were able to not actually raise the price. And so we find that working with the farmer at a more intimate level allows us to be able to do that. So I think we're unique in both of those categories.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, especially to that particular farmer, his entire network of people, how you're working with a local company too. So you're not putting any more pennies or dimes into, we'll just put it a really umbrella statement, any bad companies or anything like that. You're purely going with local people that are doing good things for their community, producing good products, just good all around.
Absolutely. There will be, mark my words, there will be a day, because we just opened up our own production facility in Pennsylvania. There will be a day and I'm guessing the semi-near future that people are delivering meat from their farm by horse and buggy to our plant. So it doesn't get much more real than that.
I love it. I love it. You just need like a big sign on the back that says like "Make way for answers" or something.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. So that takes us into what I wanted to talk about next, which is, when you say fermented foods, because I know that we have new people watching because that's my main demographic of people. Like we have Jamie that is watching right now who's a core student, book reader. I love Answer products and I love researching pet nutrition. I'm continuously researching to learn more and more. So there are people that are new to all of this stuff that's watching. So can you give us the definition of what fermented foods are? What's the difference between a fermented vegetable and just mashed, blended, boiled, and why is it magic? Why is it magic and do so many magical things? What is a fermented food and why are they awesome?
Well, fermented food is essentially food that's been pre-digested by bacteria. So it's food that's already been eaten by bacteria. And so here's a good example of that. I think I can kind of illustrate it through our goat's milk. So what we do is we take raw milk, which is the world's most complete and balanced food, right? And the most efficient food. And then we have bacteria start to eat it before your animal actually, ingests it, right? Which makes it, so what we do is Irvin, who's our guy who essentially puts all of the liquid products into the containers. There's 2 Amish guys in Pennsylvania. So Irvin takes some local raw honey, because honey is high in sugar, right? He heats that honey up to 90 degrees, so it's still in a raw food state. And then he adds 2 buttermilk cultures to it. And those buttermilk cultures wake up and they go, oh my God, it's a sugar party. And they start eating all the sugar and they start reproducing, right? And they start reproducing. So then he takes, so all of the sugar in that is then eaten by those bacteria. Then he takes that mixture, adds a cup of that per 60 gallons, and then those cultures get into the milk and they go, oh, there's lactose sugars here. And they start to eat the lactose sugar. So they're pre-digesting. So that's really the core of kombucha. That's really the core of, fermented raw milk, of fermented vegetables. All of those things is you're pre-digesting not only the food, which is important because there's a few aspects to that. One, you're reducing the sugar content in any given vegetable, right? So if you can take, we just released 3 new cheese treats that have blueberry, cranberry, and cherry, right? So this is being stirred in while this cheese is at 100 degrees, right? So it's still in a raw food state, but you're adding that. So those bacteria are going to start eating the sugar. So you're going to get the antioxidant benefits of the actual berries, but then you're not going to get the sugar part that you get from eating a blueberry or something.
Right.
Dogs don't really need sugar at all, right? A small amount's not really going to affect them. It'll either be 0 or like a super negligible amount. But also,
you had to do lab tests to find it.
Yeah, exactly right. And so then the other part about fermentation as well is you add extra things that aren't there. So you add extra vitamins, especially B vitamins, and you add extra digestive enzymes. So it's easier to digest. And then the third aspect, which I think is like the coolest aspect of it,
and before you move on from that part, are you saying that the actual bacteria digesting it add those things in there, or you guys as a company are adding in those?
No, the bacteria that digest it is a byproduct of their digestion. How cool is that?
Which is exactly so cool.
For huge nerds, it's very cool. So I will never be shy about the fact that I'm a huge nerd. So the third part about fermentation is, and this we've sort of proven throughout the years by taking other companies' data and actually saying, okay, how much do you feed a 30-pound dog of brand X, of Y, and Z? And usually you're looking at what, like 2%, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look on our feeding calculator online, our numbers are less than 2% for an adult, because when the bacteria pre-digest the food, you will require less calories to perform the same metabolic functions in your dog. So you will physically feed less of our food than anything else because it's already been pre-digested by bacteria.
Because your dog isn't putting as much of that caloric energy towards digesting and being able to use the food, and they're just able to use the food. Like, obviously they have to do some digestion, but a lot lower of that, we'll just call it energy. They spend a lot less of the energy that they're getting from their food digesting that food, and they're using more of the food, which means you have to feed less. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's actually a good,
theory, because we don't know 100% exactly what the mechanism of that is. Here's a good example of that. So when I homebrew kombucha, right? So when I take the tea and I take my 7 black tea bags in my 1 green tea bag, and I add the sugar to it, and then I put the SCOBY in there, right? We know that tea is starting off with X amount of caffeine that's very high. And
there you go, everybody. There's Billy's magic formula concoction.
So then we know that once the kombucha is actually brewed, that when we test kombucha, because we've seen results on this, that the caffeine is negligible to almost doesn't exist. Now, nobody knows how that kombucha metabolizes the caffeine or what mechanism that is. We just know it's less. And so with our stuff we definitely have some good theories about why that is, but we just know that we have the data of feeding less versus feeding more of other, raw brands. But there's also data that even other companies have done that aren't us, that, for instance, that you'll feed more of something that's HPP versus something that's raw, and people have had to adjust their feeding tables. And so all processing affects food, I think, more than people think. But fermentation it's still in a raw food state, but raw. And actually, I will touch on your question about vegetables, because that's important as well. So I think vegetables, I mean, this is kind of like a controversial thing in the raw food industry.
He said the V word.
Yeah, in the raw food, in raw food circles and groups and such. I think vegetation is a necessary part of a dog's diet, albeit in small amounts. To give you an idea, I like to play around with the formulation of my own dog's food. I obviously use Answers products, but I play around with them and I do that. And I like to add never frozen vegetables and never frozen eggs, and because frozen is great, but there's also value to fresh as well, right? That's never been frozen. So to give you an idea of this, I think that they're essential, but my dog is 13 pounds. She gets 220 calories per meal. Clearly, I'm not anal about this. And literally, she gets 1/4 of a teaspoon of vegetation, which equals about 1 calorie. So in my opinion, a little goes a long way. Now, you could do a little bit more than that, but in my opinion, a little goes a long way. But I wrote an article in Dogs Naturally about plants, and I said the number 1 and 2 things you can give a dog are fermented vegetables and sprouts. Sprouts, because that's the most nutrient dense part of a plant's life, right? Because all of that energy is coming out of the seed, and that energy is measurable because it's vitamins. That's the really cool thing about that. But with fermentation, it's almost like the death and decay stage. That's kind of, I did the article on like the life cycle of a plant, and fermentation is like the plant has died and it's being eaten by bacteria, right? And so what you get there is you get all the things you want. You get those antioxidant properties, you get the fiber properties, you get all of the vitamins and minerals, and you reduce the sugars down to virtually nothing. I use a product, I can get it in California here at the health food store, and they ferment it with lemon juice, which is a very interesting way to ferment it. And the other cool thing about that product is, or any fermented vegetables, let's say you want to make them at home, they last forever. I have that in my fridge for 5 or 6 months. I obviously go through it very slowly, given the amounts I just told you. So I don't have to, throw anything away or anything like that. So there's nothing bad about not feeding non-fermented vegetables. It's just that I think if you're taking out vegetables because you have a certain belief about it's not in a wolf's diet or something like that, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you're kind of doing your dog a disservice, because we know that there's health benefit to it. So.
Right. So then that's a perfect segue into another question here, which I did not have written down, and I can't believe I didn't, because I just feel the absolute need to ask this question. And there isn't a right or wrong answer here, so don't feel on the spot.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on people now coming to the conclusion? And actually, this came to my mind first when Kimberly Gauthier said it on, I don't know if it was a blog post or a video or what she said, but comparing the digestive, system content, the stomach content of prey animals, and comparing that to fermented vegetables. Is that potentially that link between why are veggies, vegetation appropriate for a canine's diet? Because it is something that they do digest and take in the wild. What are your thoughts on that relation? Is there a relation there, or are pre-digested content in the stomachs of prey animals completely different than, fermented veggies and stuff in the way that we're thinking about them now?
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. They're very similar, because what is that stomach full of? Lactic acid, right? It's essentially fermented vegetables in the stomach of an animal. Those two things are highly related. But even if they weren't related, so one of the things, and I spoke a little bit about this on at Raw Roundup, the Dogs Naturally Online conference in the spring. One of the mistakes I see, and this is just a mistake not in the information together. Now, I'll say this: if you want to feed a dog a diet and not include vegetables and you're making this awesome home diet, I'm not going to criticize you because you're doing something that's great for your dog. Like, I'm sure your dog will do great, right? And I'm also sure that, you know, I'd rather have you be doing that than virtually anything else. And so I think that people are a little bit too hard on themselves.
Yeah.
But what people have to see is that there isn't necessarily, there doesn't have to be a correlation between what the ancestor of an animal eats and what the animal eats today, or even what a wolf eats. So if you took a wolf and you said, what do wolves eat in their native diet, right? This is what wolves eat. Now, if you made the assumption and said, therefore, that is the best diet for a wolf, and or because it's natural, and or that's the only thing wolves should eat, that's actually a logical fallacy. And for any philosophy buffs out there, you can't build an argument on a logical fallacy. It's an appeal to nature. It's saying this is what's natural, therefore it's good, which is not true necessarily. So I'll give you a really good example of that. And this is a kind of a crazy expansion of your question, but it is what it is.
Go for it.
So here's a good example of that. I work with sick animals every day. We've had certain animals that had to get over certain chronic health issues that have lived off of just raw milk and water for over a year and completely thrived. In fact, we've seen animals on just raw milk and water for more than a year, more than 2 years, get over health condition X on that diet specifically. Now, where in nature would an adult animal live off of just raw milk alone? Nowhere. But that's actually what that animal needed to get over said health condition, right? We work with a lot of animals with liver shunts, very small, mostly dogs under 5 pounds, right? Like Yorkies, right, that can only digest. We have some that the owners have found they can pretty much only digest our milk, and they're just living off of our milk. So that is a completely unnatural thing if you're basing your idea of natural on what animals do in the wild, but it is what is literally making this animal thrive. And what's our end goal? To make the animal thrive. Right. And so when it comes to plants, I think that it's a twofold. Yes, wolves eat vegetation and through the stomach, and I'm pretty sure they've been observed eating other vegetation as well. And then secondly, it's just good for them irregardless. And that's what at least we've found in the past 9 years of doing, working with, that's one of the unique things about working with a science-based pet food company is we've worked with tens of thousands of animals over the past 9 years. And so we can definitely start recognizing patterns in that system.
A huge set of data,
Exactly.
And I love that because it also kind of comes down to an availability factor, right? If you were to somehow introduce a new, completely different food source into that, wild wolf's habitat, arena, life, whatever you want to call it, would they not eat that because it wasn't there and it wasn't part of the original quote unquote natural diet? Or would they start eating it because of availability? And what outcome would that have?
And you'd have to judge then not on if it was natural, but you'd have to judge on what are the results of feeding that thing, right? And so for me and my nutritional outlook, as long as people are staying within the realm of keeping the carbohydrates low, I'm a huge proponent of fat, so I like a lot of fat, a lot of protein. I like, as long as you're keeping it within those parameters, I would highly recommend people use reproductive foods like milk, like eggs, all of these things. If food makes a baby or sustains a baby completely, it is going to be more biodiverse than any other food on the planet. And so, and we know that because we can at least look at, cross sections of data. We kind of talked about that at that party at Super Zoo about how reliable food testing is, but which I would say is not as reliable as people honestly think it is. But so
that was a great conversation, by the way. My mind literally went boom. And I think it would also be safe to say, correct me if I'm wrong here, but those same, if the food makes a baby, sustains a baby, not only, it'd be more bioavailable because those babies don't have that same digestive ability yet. Am I correct in saying that? Like a milk, an egg.
Yeah, all those things work in correlation with each other. So raw milk has been shown in at least human children to be digested within 20 minutes. So all of those things not only have all of those nutrients, but all those nutrients are made by biology and evolution to work together effectively to sustain something completely. So it's just an unmatched sense of what I like to say is, we formulate a wonderful food, right? We formulate food that dogs thrive on, that all across the country will never be able to formulate something as complete as raw milk. It's just not possible, in my opinion. I mean, maybe someday, but not in the near future for sure. And so I hesitate I think that adding all of those things in for variety is a smart thing to do for any dog or cat, really. Let's not forget about cats. I mean, I know you're the dog dad, but there are cats too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to have Jay and Adrian, for those of you guys that don't know, obviously Billy knows, but the two crazy cat ladies are coming on the channel soon to talk about fresh feeding and stuff like that for cats, because I want that resource for you guys here on the channel, but I know about this much about it, like absolutely nothing about kitties. I know they're fun, they're fluffy, and they either love you or they hate you. And that's about all I know about the cats.
It's funny because, I'm involved in, cat diets, and I know all about what a cat should eat, right? And what we formulate for certain percentages. But how to get a cat to eat, no clue. People are like, how do I get my cat to eat your food? I'm like, I'll give you 98 things to do and none of them will work. I just, it's like, I once worked with a lady who told me that it took her 6 years to transition her cat onto raw.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's like that you have more patience than any human being ever.
Oh, go and talk to Jay and Adrian. That would be my only answer, is go and talk to Jay and Adrian.
Exactly right.
They made magic happen with Cosmo, Kimberly's cat, so maybe they'll be able to work for you too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here if we have any comments before I go moving on to my next question. Lisa Weber is saying, always learn something new listening to Billy. Me too, Lisa. Seriously. I mean, let me just tell you a little bit of how interesting Billy is in person factor. Okay, I went to Super Zoo, super excited to meet everybody. Obviously, super excited to meet Karen Becker and Rodney Habib. And I'm having a conversation with Billy. And here goes Rodney and Karen walking by, and it was immediately just, oh, I'll talk to them later. Billy's talking. This is super interesting. I can't walk away right now.
Well, I will take that as well. So
there you go. Bria, I hope that I'm saying your name right. Bria is saying, why does your shirt say "not a murderer"? This is my "not a murderer," just you can't see it, but it says "not a murderer, just a raw feeder" T-shirt. It was a shirt that I made. It was totally my wife's idea, because one time I was prepping foods and I had gotten some, locally sourced beef that a friend had just slaughtered, and they of course only wanted the prime cuts, and literally there's buckets of legs and all kinds of things sticking out of buckets on my table, and my wife walks in and is like, if someone didn't know better and they walked in the front door right now, they would probably think you were some crazy murderer person or something. There's blood everywhere. There's knives. There's body parts.
At least some kind of psychopath.
Kind of psychopath. Dexter kind of dude. I don't know. But that's why my shirt says "not a murderer," because below it says "just a raw feeder."
Well, I tell you what, though, I've been there. We haven't put it out because it's we've been having trouble with costs and keeping it to where people want to buy it. But we've had a goat formula done for quite some time, and we definitely have been around, with animals being slaughtered, and that's part of the process. Nobody wants to see that, but we need to know the impact we're making on the animals. So yeah. I hear you, where sometimes you're like looking around and you're like, what am I doing? So
you're like, to me, this feels kind of normal because I do this so often, but from the outside looking in, I have to look like a crazy person. I totally agree with you on that. I feel like, and I know somebody disagrees with me, but I feel like every meat eater, at least meat eater, probably meat provider too, but at least every meat eater should at least butcher, slaughter, whatever the term you want to use is, one animal at least one time, just to get the appreciation factor of how that meat gets to your plate. It's not it's not a chicken quarter factory or something like that. Mr. Chicken Little was in the backyard at some point.
Yeah.
And
Oh, it's an animal, and the deal is, that's one of the reasons we source so well, is because we're with these animals on the farms, and you see a difference in even their, farming is an industry, right? Even good farming is an industry, and so when you raise your chickens and they live X amount of weeks or whatever for meat chickens, it still matters that they get the best possible life in between there. So it's kind of, I'm with you on that.
yeah, 100%. I mean, what is the males, especially, I think 16 weeks, something like that is when they get cold on average, 16 weeks.
For chickens or
yeah.
for what?
For like roosters, if you have roosters.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends on the breed of chicken. It depends on a lot of different things with that. But and the animal depends on the length of life. But I will tell you that the best, most connected meat I've ever had is my boss raised 2 male Jersey cows for meat on her property, and I knew these cows from being calves and growing up, and their names were Samuel and Henry. And then later we had Samuel and Henry in our freezer, but we knew where they came from, and we knew that and I will tell you this, for those of you who choose to eat meat, those cows were grass fed their entire lives and milk fed their entire lives, raw milk fed. And the really funny thing about that is, how a lot of your people listening to this might be actually able to identify with this. When you get out the raw goat's milk or whatever, and you hold up the cart and the dog starts spinning around and going all crazy, and oh my God, it's time to drink this food. Same thing would happen. I'd walk out with this big, I fed them a few times. I'd walk out with this big bucket of milk, and the cows would start running around the pasture and spinning around. And so it's the same real, biological reaction to raw milk. So somehow I circled that back to raw milk. I don't really know how, but.
Well, because you're Billy from Answers, that's how. I love it, though. That just shows a whole other quality of life and why it's so important. Because, I mean, you walk 20 feet out my door and there's cattle, and, some other than the young calves that are having fun and being, quote unquote children and stuff, you don't see a whole lot of cows spinning in circles for their hay and that kind of stuff. So that's awesome. Amazing story. Let's see here. Chrissy has an awesome question. How does freezing affect fermented food?
It doesn't ferment. Wow, that's my new word. It doesn't affect. I almost did again. It doesn't affect fermented food more than it affects regular food. So a lot of people say, like, well, doesn't it kill bacteria if you freeze food? Well, no, it doesn't. It stops them. It puts them in suspended animation. Now, how do we know this? Because we test foods, right? So, for instance, with our cheese treats, we had David Esch, our guy, make our cheese. We took said cheese, we froze it, we unthawed it, we sent it to a food lab, and there were 7 billion viable bacteria per ounce that were still alive after the freezing process. So you're only losing a small amount when you actually run through the freezing process. Now, I will say, whenever you freeze food, there's a slight nutrient loss, just generally, and that's not to fermented foods necessarily. It's not particular to fermented foods. It's all foods, but it's only like 1 to 2%. So, and the other thing too is, some of the bacteria can be damaged, but that's really only when you do something like freeze drying, where it's so low in temperature, then you're kind of damaging some of those bacteria. But just if you're freezing it in your freezer, those fermented foods will have basically the same nutritional value, and once they come up to not being frozen anymore, those bacteria will wake up. And if you put them out at room temperature again, those bacteria will continue to multiply very quickly. Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. They just keep growing and growing and growing. It's they're bacteria. It's what they do. Right.
Exactly. Every 20 minutes, roughly.
Let's see here. Do we have any other good questions? Priya is saying, "Oh, I was only seeing." I get that question about this shirt all the time, Bria. Like, you're not the first one. Don't feel bad. But the looks that this shirt gets me in public is worth the whole $18 that it cost me to buy it. Because I mean, like, kids tugging on mom's shirt, being like, "Oh, look at his shirt," or the weird looks that I get from adults. I mean, the
Well,
reaction
especially
is worth it enough.
they have no context to like what a raw feeder is, so it's even worse. So
yeah, I've had people like cashiers ask me where it's, you know, really up close, like, oh, what does your shirt say? And I'll say it, I'll read it out loud to them, and you can just see like the disconnect. The what? I still don't like get that at all. I'm like, it's okay, you don't need to. Yeah. Hilarious. Lisa is saying, my cat will not eat raw. He likes his mice and chipmunks though. Well, he eats raw. He just likes it really, really fresh.
that is an absolute wonderful diet. In fact, Irvin, one of our Amish farmers, has two. He has 3 dogs now. It's funny. He has 2 shepherds that are working dogs, and these dogs live the best life of any dog I've ever seen. Right when you're at the farm, they're jumping, 12 feet up on hay bales, and they have jobs. And then it's funny. His 3rd farm dog he got was a Great Dane, which is ridiculous. The Great Dane's name is Grant, but his other dogs, Chelsea and Roxy, those dogs get Answer's milk, they get Answer's food, and he's like, yeah, but they don't always eat it because they prefer the fresh rabbits. And I was like, as well they should. Those 2 dogs, their backup plan is Answer's. Those dogs get the best diet of any dog on earth. So I'm kind of envious of them.
Seriously, such an awesome story. And Lisa goes on to say, my dogs love Answers. They remind me of when dinner time is. That's how much they love it. There you go, Billy. More testimonials for you.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for buying our food. We really appreciate it.
Bruce Wayne is saying, thanks for hosting this live, and say hi to Billy for us, please.
Oh,
Bruce Wayne says hi.
I met her at Global. And
there you go.
How's it going?
There you go. JHS Non-Official 13, super interesting name, says there are a lot of articles going around about taurine deficiency. And I think this is supposed to be, oh no, it is. Taurine deficiency inducing DCM due to grain-free kibble / raw diets. Can you go into how taurine is produced / absorbed? Feel free to either go into it or not.
No, I knew this was going to come up. I knew it. I just knew it. I've been fielding questions about this all week.
So you're like ready to go then. You're locked and loaded.
It's so funny. In fact, I was on a conference call today and I got a text about it. I get a lot of texts from people who I've worked with in the past. I don't know who they are. And of course, somebody texted me and they said, well, what about taurine? We did a Facebook post on this today. So let me say this. So the way
get ready.
The way that kibbles are produced, this is just the first thing that you're going to see. This is the first nutrient that you're going to see lacking in dogs' diet. Now, why is this? And we talked about this a little bit at the party, but it goes further than that. So this is the first nutrient that you're seeing not available to the dog, and it's because all of these grain-free kibbles. And I did read that, and I did read that they included home raw diets, which I don't know how they can say home raw diets aren't a singular thing. So how then do you know if there's enough taurine in home raw diet? But when it comes to grain-free foods, they're all made with the wrong types of plants, and all of those plants have anti-nutrients that stop the absorption of a whole host of nutrients. So when they started doing grain-free kibbles 10 years ago, there was no real research into, hey, what is the long-term effect on, because there is no real long-term research in the pet food industry. So they said, what is the real long-term effect of all of these using, peas or, whatever they're using in place of these grains or whatever. And this is the first thing you're seeing. It's sort of like we talked about, like if you eat too many unfermented seeds or unsprouted seeds, then you're dealing with phytic acid, and it's stopping you from absorbing certain nutrients and stealing those nutrients from your body. The reason isn't because these diets are necessarily lacking in taurine, right? They may or may not be lacking in taurine, but even if they had enough taurine, they have enough of these crappy plant ingredients that are actually stopping the absorption of the actual taurine itself. So how do you stop that? don't use crappy plant ingredients, right?
Don't make a pet food based purely off of how much is it going to cost you to produce it.
Exactly. So people have been asking me all week, how much taurine is in X and how much taurine is in this product and how much, but then that's a double-edged sword as well, because not all taurine is created equal, right? The taurine in raw milk, which for instance, raw goat's milk is very high in taurine. We put it in our cat food to kind of meet that taurine quota, right? Is different, has a different bioavailability than the taurine in like corn or whatever Purina wants you to get your, in terms of doing that. And so it's twofold, right? It's taurine is absolutely necessary, right? In not only cats, it's more significant in cats, but absolutely necessary in dogs and in people. So it's a twofold problem. It's not enough taurine, and it's ingredients that actually present the absorption. Now, here's what I predict you're going to see coming in the next 5 years. You're going to see a lot more nutrients that they start to go, oh, all these dogs are deficient in this nutrient, because those plants are not just stopping the absorption of taurine, right? They're stopping the absorption of many, many nutrients. And that's the problem of just, a high wrong plant type diet, irregardless. So I can tell you this, if you make a raw diet that is low in carbohydrates and has enough organ meat, you won't have a taurine deficiency. If you use raw milk on a daily basis, if you feed whole raw fish, if you use fermented fish stock, if you use goat cheese, raw goat cheese, you will not have a taurine deficiency, because those things, organ meat is one of the best sources of taurine. And that's why, we use a higher organ meat content than most companies. And one of the neat things about that is you get all of that taurine. And so most of your audience does not have to worry about that. If you really want to make sure that you're getting enough taurine, raw milk or raw cheese is an amazing source of it.
Golf clap.
Hopefully that answered the question.
I love it. And that actually segues, and tell me, Scott, shut up. I need to walk away at any point in this conversation, because if not, I'm going to keep you on here for like 6 hours. Okay, maybe not that long.
No, this is my last thing for the day, and you're on Mountain Time, right? It's only almost 5 here, so I'm on West Coast time. So
yep, almost 6. So this actually brings up an interesting question that somebody asked me the other day in one of my Facebook group live streams, and I have some thoughts on it, but there have been some articles, info coming out about, instead of looking at this whole 80-10-10 thing, that maybe we should actually be providing more like 20% organ content. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this as somebody that is working for a company that is using a higher organ content than other raw food companies? What are your thoughts on increasing overall organ content in raw diets?
I think the best way to frame that question would be, what is your opinion on this, being someone who helps to develop diets for a brand that uses 30% organ content? Because that's where we fit.
There you go.
We're higher. We're higher than that. And then, you run into what is an organ, right? Literally an organ is just a group of cells that performs a function. Right. So, if you go by that definition, which is the actual medical definition, you have a lot more organs than you actually think in terms of your body. So I will say the last article I wrote in Dogs Naturally magazine was about this topic. And so if you have a subscription to the magazine, you can only read it right now if you have a subscription. But so I go into a little bit more detail in this. And so the typical breakdown of our diets are, so if you look for the beef, for example, right? So beef of the total content is 90% of the actual formulation of meat, right? And then you get your eggs, your fermented vegetables, et cetera, below that. So of that 90%, it's 60% muscle, 30% organ, and 10% bone. Now within that organ, we are including heart, so it's 10% heart, 10% kidney, and 10% liver. So it's still 20% liver and kidney. Now there is a we used to get more grief for this, and now we don't really get grief because it works, right? We know that we've never had an issue with fat-soluble vitamin toxicity in the history of our company, right? And technically, we're using, fermented cod livers as well in our food, which would also, I guess, add to the organ content by a few percent as well. So what people, here's the main difference. So what people think to themselves is, because they've looked at studies and they've said, okay, this study said if you take too much vitamin A, like actual vitamin A, not beta carotene, but actual vitamin A or vitamin D, you can develop a toxicity. And why is that? Because fat-soluble vitamins are soluble in fat and they're stored in fatty tissue, right? And so therefore you can build up a toxicity if you do too much organ meat. But what they're not realizing is that none of these studies were done with actual food, right? And so what happens is you could take a vitamin A supplement or a vitamin D supplement, and you could get a toxicity if you took a ton of it. Now, why is that? It's because you're introducing one of those vitamins. So there's three main vitamins that you want to think about. It's vitamin A, vitamin D, and the lesser known, my absolute favorite vitamin, vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 is not vitamin K1, like when you eat a salad and it's, oh my God, 8,000% of my vitamin K. It's not that one, it's a different one. It's vitamin, it performs a different function. And it's as important as vitamin A and D. Now, what you find in terms of their relation to each other is they all relate to each other, and they all have specific built-in safety mechanisms that stop you from having a toxicity. So as long as those are introduced through food, be it through eggs, be it through meat, be it through raw milk, be it through an animal food source, as long as they are introduced through food and all three of those things are present, there is no toxicity. So the toxicity limit rises to virtually nothing. So again, when you know that information, you think to yourself, wow, well, organ meat is actually the healthiest possible meat for a mammal to eat. So we need to include more of this. And I think it speaks for itself in that we've been doing a 30% diet. And then you got to remember, these people are also adding milk. They're also adding fermented fish stock, which is also, has actually a pretty good low dosage of all of those vitamins as well. So if you have someone who's been using Answers Pet Food for the last 6 years, and they're using our detailed formula, our goat milk, and our fish stock, they're getting over 30%, and we've never dealt once with vitamin toxicity. So I think we can just dispel that rumor outright.
Dude, you're blowing my mind right now. I need to read this. I need to read this article.
It gets a little bit more into the nitty gritty of how that works, like the actual science between the vitamins and how they relate to each other. But that's kind of where we've always stood. But I will say this again, I'm not getting down on people. If you're using the 80-10-10 and you're buying quality ingredients, you're doing so much better than 99% of the earth. So good job.
Right. Yes. And this, before, I just want to say it so that I don't forget it, but then I want to ask answer some questions and come back to it. But we had a discussion at Super Zoo in Vegas a few weeks ago. Was it a month ago almost already?
No, it was 3 weeks, I think.
Okay. It just feels like a lifetime ago because it was so awesome, and now it's gone.
Well, it'll be there next year, I promise.
We were having a discussion about how people beat themselves up too much over perfection and get a little bit too anal about things and try to overcomplicate this whole fresh food raw feeding thing. People weighing things down to the milligram and wanting to feel sad or guilty if they're like 10 milligrams off of this or that or something like that. So I want to touch on that, but I don't want to completely ignore these guys' comments.
Absolutely.
Rowan says, thank you, Answers, for all you do for our dogs. Best food, hands down.
Well, thank you very much.
Dude, feel free, by the way, just come through after we're done and just start clipping these things for testimonials and articles. Moose on the Loose. I love your name. That is freaking awesome. Moose on the Loose. I used to feed my dog Answers Raw. Fantastic food. My dog did great on it. We only switched to a homemade raw diet because we found it to be cheaper. Just like he's saying, whatever is working for you, right? If you're providing a healthy diet, your dog is thriving, That's awesome. And I agree.
Mhm.
Fantastic food. Lisa is saying, I cringe when I see people at the grocery store putting cheap / bad kibble in their carts. I immediately want to start lecturing them on pet nutrition and how bad the food is that they're buying. You know, Lisa,
that won't work out well for you.
No, it won't. I feel you. I really do. Because there is that part of me that every time I walk by the pet food aisle, there is that little like cringe factor because you know better. But nobody on planet Earth has ever made a positive change because of how bad somebody told them that they sucked and for attacking their beliefs. Like, feel free to enter in something positive. Yeah. But it's not going to work. Like, I promise, save yourself the argument in Walmart or your Kroger store or wherever it is, because that's.
But her heart is in the right place.
Yes.
And her dog is lucky to have her.
Exactly. All that you know what you can do, Lisa, which is another thing that got talked about at Super Zoo, is if you don't have one already, open an Instagram account, something, and start sharing what you're doing to normalize this whole fresh food thing so that you can indirectly influence people to make those changes.
That's a good point.
So coming back to this overcomplicating things, how do people, and this is kind of since we already talked a little philosophical, how do you think people can approach this whole, again, raw feeding fresh foods thing and feel like they are doing a good job, feel like, you know, I'm adequate, I'm doing a good enough job, while not driving themselves freaking bonkers with spreadsheets and milligrams and all these different things? You know, how can someone take an approach to their food without going and getting a Hills Professor Kitty rocket science degree?
No, totally. Yeah, no. Well, the simple answer is you just don't have to. So the number one thing, but there's no shortcut. There's two things. You don't have to do that. And the second thing is it's sourcing. Sourcing is everything. So it sort of breaks my heart a little bit when I see people move to a raw, fresh food diet, frozen diet, and then they try to cut corners in terms of buying as cheaply as possible, because they're saying, well, it's human grade, it's this or that. So if you're doing that, you might actually run into some issues. But if you're sourcing as best as you can possibly afford, I know there's whole different situations with, you know, what people, whole gambit, etc. So here's what people take false assurance in. Okay, I was at a nutrition conference in Southern California, and by the way, I do want to plug my own thing real quick.
Do it, man. Do it.
I was asked to speak at the Raw Natural Dog Summit in Chicago in November, the first weekend in November, and I'm going to be speaking generally on this topic. I'm going to be introducing a method, sort of a new method of feeding, and it's the presentation is actually called How I Feed My Dog, and it's the process I go through, and it simplifies what people do, right? Because but I digress.
I love it. Billy Model Raw.
Well, and I told my wife that in the presentation I'm calling it the Hoekman method, and her eyes rolled out of her head, I think, when I told her that. So she's like,
did I pronounce your last name wrong? Is it Hoekman, not Hoekman?
It's Hoekman, but that's totally fine. So don't even worry about it. It looks like Hoekman. So, and actually, my wife would also tell you that she thinks it's probably Hoekman as well. But when it comes to, so I was at a nutrition conference in Southern California, and this nutrition conference, they were looking for fat-soluble vitamins in food. And so they were looking for those things I was just talking about, vitamins A, vitamin C, vitamin K2. And what did they do? They took food sources like liver, they cut them in half, they sent them to two of the most reputable labs in the country, and lo and behold, they got completely different results at both places, which is what you would expect, because there is no super reliable test for food testing, for nutrient testing. And it depends on the nutrient. Some nutrients are better than other in terms of those nutrients. Now that's the first part, right? So the only thing we can do reliably is to say, we tested this food, or we tested 10 different cow livers, and every cow liver had this one says it has this much vitamin D, this one this much, this one. So we can say that there's vitamin D in cow livers. So that's the first thing, right? You can do this process. But there is no maybe a what?
And maybe a range. Like we
Yes.
find that somewhere between this and this.
Yes. So you can get your range, but there is no way to reliably know that. I bought eggs and eggs have X amount of vitamin D. That's not a knowable fact. Okay. Right. The second fact about that, the second part of this is that even if you could understand that, even if we develop a test that says, wow, this is going to be the exact amount of this food tested. It's when you're dealing in meat and you're dealing in eggs and reproductive foods, it's that specific food. So it's not X amount of vitamin D in eggs. It's what did that chicken eat? Was the chicken in the sunshine and absorbing more sun and actually producing more vitamin D, right? For a cow, what specific grass did they eat that day? Were they grass-fed? Were they grain-fed, right? All of those things will change the actual outcome of the nutrient content. So there is I would argue that there is no reliable database that says we can look at food X and say there's this amount of vitamin D in it or whatever it might be, right? And so what we can do is we can develop a system where we say, okay, we're going to source our food the best. We're going to feed reproductive foods to make up for any nutritional deficiencies, right? And then we just do the best we can. But that is where cutting corners hurts you. So we know that there's less vitamin D in an egg that's conventionally raised and from a chicken that doesn't eat grass and bugs, which is its native diet, right? We know that there's less. And so if you source everything on the cheapest end, there is where you kind of run into it. And then you also run into issues with fat as well. And the one example I'll give of that is fat content. So as important as fat content or amount is type, right? So if you look at, your grain-fed beef versus your grass-fed beef. So if you look at your cow that only eats 100% grass, grain-fed beef, from my best research and data, has at least a 1 part omega-3 to 17 parts omega-6 content. Now the healthy scale, so what you want to shoot for is feeding, not supplementing, but feeding foods that are in the healthy omega-3 to 6 scale, because it's all that matters, right, is their relation to each other. Mm-hmm. The healthy scale, from the best information I've looked at, is 1 part omega-3 to 9 parts omega-6 and lower. So anything within that, you're not dealing with inflammatory foods, because omega-6s are inflammatory, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. They're both as necessary as each other. So to illustrate the difference in buying food, if you buy food that's finished, if you buy beef that's finished on grain, that will be at least 17 parts omega-3, at least. I mean, it goes higher than that. And that is an unhealthy food. It's a pro-inflammatory food. That's the wrong ratio of omega fatty acids. Now, if you were to buy 100% grass-fed beef, the typical ratio is 2 to 1, which is an insanely healthy, right inflammatory and anti-inflammatory response producing food. And so I would say as long as you're including your balanced reproductive foods and sourcing correctly, you're probably not going to deal in deficiencies. And then the thing to remember too is if you're ever driving yourself crazy, you can't know the things you want to know, so just let it go. Yeah, that's my best advice. I'm anal about how I feed my dog, so I get it. I totally get it.
I love it. And can you just one more time state that healthy range, omega-3 versus omega-6? Just so we have that.
So it's 1 part omega-3 to 9 parts omega-6 and lower. And the nice thing is if you source all your stuff correctly, so if you buy your milk from your raw milk from grass-fed animals, if your chickens eat grass and bugs, if the animals eat their native diets, they're automatically within that range, and you don't have to supplement. So it does the work for you just by being kind to the animals.
Right. I love it. And that's one of the reasons why with my chickens that live, I can't say this word or else the dogs will freak, OUTSIDE.
Yes.
They live out there. They get meat scraps, they get veggie scraps, they get all these different food, bugs, earthworms, all these things that they would naturally eat. And those are the eggs that I feed to my dogs. Like, it's so crazy.
So those are the best eggs you could potentially buy or produce yourself.
The whole "my dogs eat better than I do" thing is totally true, because they get the eggs that are, you know, produced out in the backyard by our chickens, and I don't.
Oh, I see.
Let's spoiled little buggers.
I'm currently trying to convince my wife to be a chicken egg farmer in Pennsylvania. And if I can convince her to do that, we'll actually raise some of the eggs for Answer's Food. So that's that's my dream, which is funny because we live in East Hollywood in LA right now. So it'd be quite the change of scenery.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, would it be like, I don't even know, California to whole lots of Amish people?
That's exactly, which I like better, but I'm not. I live in Los Angeles. I'm not really a Los Angeles person, I think, but
I love it. So for those people that, for, let's say, for the obvious reason, the financial aspect of, you know, quote unquote, cutting the corners of having to get those not as amazing sources of food, can they kind of safeguard themselves and fill in those holes, let's say, in the diet by feeding reproductive foods like raw goat's milk?
Yes, milk and eggs are nature's two most healthy foods, and so milk and eggs will help you to go against deficiencies, but also to help out that ratio. I guess what I think is, if you're a feeder and you're making your food at home and you're saying, like, because everybody wants variety, right? Like, everybody wants to use, it becomes like everyone wants to use like 80 different protein sources, which is kind of insane to me, but everyone wants to do all these different things. I'm okay with like 4 or 5, because protein is in everything, right? Protein is in the milk you feed, is in the eggs. You're getting, everywhere. Yeah, you're getting, it's like a sci-fi. It's all around you. No, but they're
so true though.
It's so. But what I would encourage people to do is, if you're in the situation where you really need to cut corners, I would, you know, feed your raw milk and feed your reproductive foods, but also maybe limit the amount of proteins you get and just buy the good version of like 1 or 2. Right? And you're still feeding better than, you know, virtually anyone on, you know, 99% of the planet. But if you can go and buy your, you know, if you can't afford your grass-fed beef, but you can afford your pasture-raised chicken from Whole Foods or something like that, right? Then just feed the chicken and add some other things to it. If you're adding reproductive foods, you're not going to get a deficiency. Now, I know there's articles about you have to feed red meat because of X, Y, and Z. Milk and eggs will cover those deficiencies. You don't have to do that. And so a good example of that, I feed my dog our cat food. The reason I do this is because it's more dense of a formulation. I can play around with sort of my own formulation, right? I can add things easier. I can do certain things. And I like the consistency of the turkey and chicken. My dog, 90% of the year, eats only turkey and chicken as the main food source. And I would argue she eats the healthiest diet of any mammal on the planet. And actually, she has her food has a hashtag on Instagram, which is Lua's dog food. LUAS dog food. Lua's dog. And her name's Lua. So
I love it. I love it. So basically, if you have those, what I'm hearing is that if there are people out there that are watching, which we had as many as 21 people watching at one time. Thank you. You guys are awesome.
Oh, great.
If you have those concerns, start adding in those reproductive foods, eggs, raw milk, that kind of stuff, and maybe spend less money on variety and spend more money on higher quality sources of protein instead of more sources of protein.
Yeah.
And I love that, because so many people do get caught up in that variety factor. I've had more people than I can remember post in my group saying, you know, I'm feeding chicken, turkey, rabbit, pork, and beef. I'm afraid that I'm not putting enough variety into my dog's food. I'm like, you are doing awesome. Are you kidding me? 5 proteins like that on a regular, you know, proteins just being the nomenclature, the jargon.
Because it's so much more than protein, right?
Exactly. But for those of you guys that don't know, that are total newbies, when the fresh food raw feeding community says proteins, they're just talking about animal sources. So beef is a protein, pork is a protein, chicken is a protein, not the actual, you know, amino acids, et cetera, but just a different animal source. That's what we're talking about when we say that.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of reminds me of when I'll have customers call me and they'll be like, okay, I'm rotating between, we have chicken, beef, turkey, and pork. They'll be like, I'm rotating between all those. I'm rotating between the goat's milk and your cow's milk kefir. I'm also rotating between the bone broths and I do the cheese treats. What else can I do? And I'm like, nothing. You're doing amazing. You're doing the best possible thing, I think. So it just kind of depends. But and I understand it because it's funny. I work with, dogs that are dying every day. Right. And so to bring it down a couple of notches, no, but so I work with animals who are in dire need of help. And I'm telling people on a daily basis, you got to power through this. Or if a dog's going through detox symptoms, you just got to power through it. They'll be better for it on the other side. Right.
Right.
However, if my dog itches, I'm like, wait, are you mildly uncomfortable for 2 seconds? What do I need to change? What do I do? Like, she can't be uncomfortable for more than a second before I start to be like, oh my God, do I need to comfort you? So I totally understand, your dog as opposed to other people's dogs.
I love it. I freaking love it. That is hilarious. Are you mildly uncomfortable for 2 seconds? I love it. Let's see if we have any questions here, and then we will give ourselves a wrap up and see if we can't get Billy back to his wife and Lula.
Yeah, my dog had to wait for dinner, so she's just staring at me. She's laying on the rug, just staring at me. So
she's mildly
uncomfortable. She is.
Let's see here. Lisa went on to comment a few more times saying, I promote the Answers diet every chance I get. I'm lucky to have access to their great products. Yes, you are. And if I can't get them to switch totally, I've at least convinced them to feed the goat's milk. Every little bit helps. There you go. There you go. I love it.
Oh, well, thank you. We are, and that's very special to us because we are one of the only pet food companies that doesn't have any salespeople. So we truly do appreciate when people become advocates. Well, here's the deal. We don't have a sales pitch. Our only sales pitch is, look, it's the best possible thing. Either do it or don't. If you want to do it, great. If you don't want to do it, we can't get everybody. So
a product's so good, it just sells itself.
Well, there's always a market for people who do the right thing. So that's kind of where we fall. And I just made that up on the spot, but that could be like a tagline for our company.
Write it down now. Make good, do good. Make good. I love it. Jamie is saying, before I switched to a fully raw diet I just fed raw goat's milk and fish stock, etc. When people would pet my dogs, they would, and what Jamie is saying, because I know her, because she's a course student and book student and everything like that, but she's saying that before she switched, she was still feeding the goat's milk and the fish stock. Mm-hmm. And when people would pet her dogs, they would compliment on how soft they were. I swear it was from the goat's milk. I tell so many people about the Answers products. Love it.
And I'll see the goats in like 2 weeks. So I will definitely let them know that I tend to be that person who's like, thank you so much for what you do. Like, I just like have a conversation with the goats. But, on that note, and I think that's a very important point to bring up because you brought up the taurine thing. And so there's a lot of people who will see this, just even, I don't know. I'm hoping I can share it. I don't know. Technology does. Yeah. Okay, cool. So there'll be a lot of people who see this even beyond the live part of it. Right. And so the number one thing you can do if you're afraid about taurine, add our fish stock, add our goat's milk, or feed the cheese treats. Do one of those things, do two of those things, and I can guarantee you won't get a taurine deficiency. Do one of those things, and the likelihood would be very, very little. So,
and do all three, and you're bulletproof.
Exactly. I mean, who doesn't love to give the dog cheese? That's the main thing.
Oh, it's like, don't say the C word in this house unless you absolutely mean it, or else Wolfie will be mildly uncomfortable with rage because he's not getting some. I love it.
That's true.
So I only have 2 very quick questions, and I'll get you out of here because it's just, this first one should just be a yes or no answer. When is you're going and speaking with the FDA, right? Or not the FDA? Why What am I thinking?
AFCO?
AFCO. Yeah, there
Well,
you
the FDA will be at AFCO.
Okay, yeah, that's where I got it from. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been up I got up so early this morning. So when is that happening?
That is on, let me look at the old calendar here. It's coming up real soon. I'm going back to the farm right after that. So it's, that meeting is in Fort Lauderdale from the 30th. I'll be there from the 30th to the 31st. I think it goes from the 30th to the 1st. And we're basically the only small company who goes to every AFCO meeting. So I go to every other AFCO meeting. I go to the big summer one, and my boss, Roxanne, who is true genius, our true head food formulator, just the type of person where the first time I met her, I walked in and I was like, oh, I know a lot about food. And then she started talking. I was like, oh, I don't know anything. I'm just going to let you talk so I can just absorb, what you're talking about. So she goes to everyone, which is good because they're informative and we need to be there, but they're incredibly boring, right? So we'll be there to not only because we need to be there as a producer to know what's going on in regulations and how we can comply and all that kind of stuff, but also to support the consumer as well. So we're happy to support Susan Thixton, who's there. We're happy to support. I'm pretty sure Rodney and Karen are coming down to this one. So there'll be definitely a little crew of us, and it's kind of hilarious because we all sit in one corner. And everyone just kind of doesn't like us, I think. But yeah, it's kind of, yeah, exactly right. But it's fun because there's a movement going on. And the problem is they keep the general public out because it costs $500 to go. So not only is it $500 to get in the door, but then you have to, think about, I'm flying from LA to Fort Lauderdale, and then I have to stay in a hotel. You're talking about at least a $2,000 trip for that thing, right? And so, it's nice that there's more advocates and that they can see that people care about what their animals eat.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then on that note, would Billy be willing to come back after said AFCO meeting and discuss what happened and why it was so important?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We that was smart to ask me on air, by the way, because if I said no, I'd look like a total jerk. But
gotcha.
No, I would be happy to do that. There's a lot of interesting things that happen. So two things. The first thing is at the second meeting I was at. No, I think it was the second meeting I was at. It actually got approved, which is where I met Kimberly. No, we met before that. But anyway, I always remember I invited Kimberly to kind of like the after party at that AFCO meeting. But those crazy AFCO after parties. No, but we one of the ingredients that was approved while I was there was an ingredient called yellow grease, which is half used cooking oil and half unidentified animal fat. So to contrast that, we can't put the word sea salt on our label because it's not AFCO. There's no AFCO definition. So we use Celtic sea salt to ferment our foods. We use it in our food, right? Because it's a very mineral profile. We use Selena Naturals. It's the salt I have on my counter. It's some of the best sea salt you can buy in the entire world. But we can only physically put the word salt on the label. Now, flip side of that, you can put yellow grease on the label because, of course, that has a definition. Now, I think the funniest thing that ever happened at AFCO was so essentially when all the state regulators are introduced. So here it's actually small enough to where everyone the first day has to stand up and say who they are and where they're from. So I stand up and say, Billy Hoekman answers pet food. So you go around the room. Then they introduce the state regulators, and what they try to do is they try to make it like fun. So what they do is on the screen up front, they have like one year they had like what foods each place is known for, like each state. And so we're going through them. Now, first off, my state always wins. My home state is Wisconsin, and it's fried cheese curds. So you cannot beat that for like your state food. What, like cherries? Give me a break. So I'd like to see like a study done on if you had a table of cheese curds and cherries. Which ones would be eaten. But it was funny because they're listing off all these different states. And then clearly the person who was doing the research didn't like care or want to know anything about Michigan because it just said pastries. Like it was the most general thing you've ever heard in your entire life.
Hilarious. This is the last fun you're going to have for days, so we'll sort of try.
Yeah, exactly right. So pastries.
I love it. Awesome. Then after you get back or before you go or something, we'll have to set up a time because I knew that they were important, but before going to Super Zoo and hearing some of your accounts from last time on it, it just solidified how important it was. Not only that they're happening, but how important it is for fresh food, real food advocates to be there, making their case and sharing knowledge and bringing knowledge back from it. Like it just blew my mind on how not even important, but necessary that is. So if we can take even just a sliver of that and deliver it out to YouTube, the rest of the world and the community, then I would love to do that.
It's everything. It's pet food labeling. It's literally what can go into food. We have to register in every state we sell in, and most of those states are AFCO compliant. So if you want to put bee pollen in your food, you can't in an AFCO state. You just physically can't do it, or the state won't allow you to actually sell it. And so, good example of that is when we created our first cheese treats, we did turmeric, spirulina, and ginger. We got to pick between 30 ingredients in the flavorings and additives section of the AFCO OP, which is the official publication. Which, by the way, you have to pay $100 for if you ever want to read that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because I want to mention the people who are dedicated to going every time. So Dr. Kathy Alanovi, who goes to every AFCO meeting, she actually runs a group. So she's essentially runs a group that represents small manufacturers at AFCO. So we're involved in that. There's some other groups involved, and it gives us a voice. And she goes to everyone, and she's very diligent, and she's not in the limelight, and she just does, that's just who she is. And then there's also a store owner who started a retail organization for that sort of thing to give people a voice at AFCO, named Chelsea Kent in Colorado, and she's been coming to every AFCO meeting, and that's really, this is out of her own pocket. And so for her to be able to do that, and I will tell you this, Chelsea is incredibly smart, and she's incredibly brave. She'll go up. So when these committees are going, there's a microphone. You can walk up and say whatever you want. And it's an intimidating atmosphere. And the first meeting I was at with her, she went up there 9-10 times and was asking questions and making rebuttals. And so, I have a lot of respect for anyone who goes there on a consistent basis. It's a really great thing.
Well done all around, because if you guys aren't there, then as far as they're concerned, we don't exist. So kudos to all of you for going, because literally if you're not there, we have no voice, we don't exist, and they can just keep doing whatever they want to do unchallenged.
And whatever they want to do is the key. And it's for those, and I won't give too much away because, we got to do this after the meeting, but it's worse than you think. It's much worse than you think. So
next time might be a more informative conversation rather than not that this hasn't been informative, but a darker side of informative. You're not going to like to hear this, but you need to hear this kind of conversation.
It'll prove why you either need to trust the people who are making your food or make your own food.
There you go. That might be the answer to our final closing question. So you might have to think about that one. So I asked Dr. Laura Kozier when I had her on, I published it, just yesterday, but I had her on last week. I've been asking people this question, and some of them have just had an answer like that, and you might already have yours. And some of them are like, oh, that was a good question. I don't know. And that is, if you were, and I found a really good way to explain it finally, because I tripped over myself every time beforehand. If you're at the airport and you're on those walkways that just go, they're like flat escalators. I don't know what they're actually called. You're going past each other and you've got 20, maybe 30 seconds before they're just out of earshot and they're not going to hear what you're saying anymore. If you are passing somebody that is thinking about fresh foods, thinking about making healthier choices for their pets in whatever arena it was, whatever level it is, what is the one thing that you could convey to that person in that 20, 30-second period, and you're never going to be able to teach them anything else again, and they're gone?
Wow. Well, you know, it's funny. That's a funny question for us because at Answers Pet Food, we're known for rambling on, you know, for hours on end.
Like an hour and a half live stream.
Exactly. So, you know, that's an interesting question. I thought you were going to go to the question with the, I didn't watch it yet, but I saw like the tagline was, you know, talking to your vet about raw food, which I think is a very good subject for you to have put out there. Because boy, I get so many people who are talk to me about that, right? Even the vet, you know, I admittedly don't go to the vet very often, but I've even gotten some nutritional suggestions, and I was kind of like, I'm pretty sure I got this. I don't know. I might have this, but it is what it is. So at any rate, what I would say is that, so this is just like what I can tell them, and then they may want to do it or research, or they may want to do their own thing.
Yeah, it's basically like the one tip, like the one most important thing you could possibly tell somebody. Like if it was me, I would tell them that do your own research on everything. Your dog is an individual, and there are no cookie cutter solutions.
Yeah.
Problem.
What I would say is, you understand based on how you feel that eating fresh foods makes you feel healthier and makes you feel less sick on your day-to-day. And your dog is the exact same way, and they just can't tell you. So please do research and learn what your dog needs. There's actually, and that's the end of my question, but then I'm going to elaborate further just to do that. But one of the things that I always like really look forward to when I write magazine articles is I always look for what they pull out of it. You know, there's like the big type when you read like a magazine article to like get you to read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always look like, whenever I send it in, you know, and they send me back like the slight edit and stuff like that, they'll say like, here's your grab or whatever. So I'm always really interested to see that. My favorite grab on that, which maybe I could say this, you know, is to say that, you know, we, over the past, you know, tens of thousands of years, we've bred dogs to not only understand human behavior, but to crave it and to want it, right? So we have a responsibility to feed them a diet that is not inherently detrimental to their being. So that's kind of, I guess that's what I would say.
I love that. I freaking love that. We have made them a part of our daily lives, and just like that, they can't tell us things. They didn't have a choice in it. They don't have a choice in it. They don't get to pick their owners. They don't get to pick their collars, their kennels, their leashes. They don't get to pick anything. So I love that.
Although I will say this, Lua likes my wife better than me. So she did pick her owner in that case, which is ridiculous because I had Lua for 9 years before they met. And now I feel like I was just a conduit for them to meet at some point. So she'll literally sit on the couch and like lean away from me with her paw on the thing. I'm gonna go get her. She needs a little camera time. I'll be back in 2 seconds.
No, you're good, man. Grab her. Love it, guys. I love it. This has been Billy, you guys. This is a good one. Next time is going to be fantastic. The AFCO conversation we had.
She always gets screen time, so she's the reason for my career. So but she'll be 12 in August. So she's just give me my food. I'm totally fine. But right.
I'm mildly uncomfortable right now, Dad.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I did not think that we were going to be going for almost an hour and 40 minutes, but hey,
no problem.
It is what it is. Thank you again. I'm so looking forward to our AFCO conversation. And I'm going to have to remember that tip about just asking people things live, because then they'll have to say yes. Like, yes, I didn't do it that way on purpose, but now I have that tool in my tool belt. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everybody, go and feed Answers food. I know that I need to go and get myself some and start giving it to these guys. Jamie loves it. Everybody seems to love it. I need to get my hands on some. So go and check out Answers. Billy, final closing out, where can people find your stuff, your articles that you've written, information on Answers? Where can they go to jump into Billy's world?
Well, I mean, getting a subscription to Dogs Naturally is where you can find a lot of my non-Answers related writing. I will say, if you reach out to Answers Pet Food, we have a product guide, which is 78 pages long, which is like a novel. So, and I can say that I had a good hand in writing a lot of it. And so that's some more good information there. Aside from that, you know, in terms of getting our products, we have a store locator on our website. And just keep in mind that if that store carries one thing, they can order you any of our things. So if they just have the milk, they can order you whatever you want. But I will say to those who have made comments, you know, about using our food or whatever, we're a very small family-based company. It's literally a family and me. And so I'm sort of part of the family now, but I'm the only non-blood relative really that works for the company. So we truly do appreciate, we put our heart and soul into putting this product. It's a labor of love. And when we hear people say that they, you know, trust us in feeding their animals, we truly do appreciate it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Do good, make good. I love it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Billy. Thank you guys for watching. But most importantly, remember that you don't have to be perfect to be an amazing pet owner. You just have to do your best every day and try to improve as you go forward. Peace. See you, Billy.
All right.